All right, great. We are in business. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our first ever SIP community call or community SIP call. If you read Jude's post, you know that, well, his latest forum post on scaling up the SIPs process, you know that this call is one of a few ways that we're trying to make the whole SIP process more accessible to the Stacks community. So on the one hand, the SIP process is great in that it is very thorough and very rigorous, which is necessary when you're introducing complex changes to a blockchain. But on the other hand, if you have dabbled in the SIP process at all, you know that it is quite intensive and frankly, for some, a little daunting and intimidating if you're not super experienced with Stacks technology. So in an effort to open up this process a little more, we're offering these weekly calls as a friendly space to present and discuss SIP ideas, keep up with SIP activity, and just generally meet with others involved with the SIP process as a way to just ease yourself into the SIP process if you're thinking about authoring one or just interested in commenting or participating in some of the discussions. So additionally, we plan to offer mentorship to SIP authors. We plan to onboard a SIP resident. We have a candidate on the call right now. I won't introduce them unless they want to. It's very exciting. I think they're the perfect candidate for this, and we're really excited to work with them. And on top of that, we are going to institute a pre-approval process for prioritizing SIPs from the community or proposals from the community. So if you haven't read Jude's post yet, I highly recommend that you do. I'll put the link in the chat later, or someone can put the link in the chat if you can help me out. There's a lot more information on the changes that we plan to make. For today's call, we'll be spending a good chunk of time on digging into the recent discussions around improving mining on Stacks. Okay, sorry, there are a bunch of people joining now, just as soon as I start to intro this. But yeah, we've got Jude and Maddie on the call to talk about recent discussions on mining improvements. We'll also hopefully be joined by Ryan, and we'll also open it up to questions from the community so that we can make, again, that discussion a little more accessible to everybody involved. And after that, I'll spend a little bit of time. What's that, Jude?
Oh, there's Ryan. He just popped in.
Okay, great. Well, Ryan's here. So we've got Jude, Ryan, and Maddie on the call to go through that discussion we've been seeing on Twitter and on the forum. And after that, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about other SIP activity as well as ways that you can get involved in the SIPs process. Does that sound good to everyone? Yeah. Great. Okay, so Matt, oh, I've got to make sure that Ryan is unmuted.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. All right, Maddie, whenever you're ready to get started, please.
Cool. Okay, let me share my screen here. That is the wrong screen. Way too many tabs. Can you guys see this? Cool. Okay. Let me throw on whoops. Let me just throw it on slideshow mode so full screen. Okay. So we're talking about the state of mining, SIP mining proposals. So just starting with what is the current state of mining, so we're all on the same page, setting expectations. So there are currently on average about 6 miners. Some blocks have fewer, right? But largely there's about 6 miners who have mined over the last 100 blocks of Stacks. Total bids in terms of Satoshis per block is coming in around 1.7 million. And there's obviously, when you're mining via proof of transfer, right, you're paying you're sending a Bitcoin transaction. And so there's a fee for that Bitcoin transaction, just like any other Bitcoin transaction. And right now that fee is about, 9,000 sats. The specific numbers don't matter too much, but at the current kind of Stacks Bitcoin exchange rate and a coin base of 1,000 stacks, so the reward for winning a Stacks block, for mining a Stacks block is 1,000 stacks plus the transaction fees on the stack side. This all together implies that the current profit margin is about negative 7% overall. So on an aggregate level, miners are mining at a negative 7% profit margin. And we'll look at why that is and dig into that. Before we do though, I think Jude has been really good about specifying this, especially, right? We need to be clear about what our goals of this process and this conversation are. The goal is not to make mining more profitable, right? It's not explicitly to make it more fair. It's not to just simply increase the number of miners, right? The goal is to improve the decentralization of Stacks, right? That is the actual end goal that this whole conversation, that's why we're having this conversation, to improve the decentralization of stacks. Secondary goals are not to overly congest, the Bitcoin chain. Like if we suddenly snapped our fingers and magically manifested 10 million stacks miners, right? That would clog the Bitcoin chain with with what it could not handle. So secondary goals don't congest the Bitcoin chain and reward Bitcoin miners in the long term. Stacks is potentially a reward for Bitcoin miners once Bitcoin mining rewards expire or as they diminish. Not, there are conflicting views on that one, so that's not really like a fact as a secondary goal, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, given the goal, remember that given the goal is to improve the decentralization of stacks, there's some metrics to kind of evaluate that against. One is to increase the number of miners required to reach 51% of all bids. Right now, the largest two miners over the last 100 blocks or so have about 56% of the voting power of the bids. So right now that number is 2. We want to increase that number so that there's a higher number required to compose 51% of mining activity. We also want to increase the Gini coefficient of mining. So traditionally, you may or may not have heard of Gini coefficient. If not, don't worry about it. Traditionally, it's a measure of income inequality. In this context, it's a measure of how distributed mining activity is, right? So whereas the first metric of the number of miners that have 51% of bids is this very discrete, right, Boolean almost metric, Gini coefficient is just a more continuous function to kind of help us measure, are we making mining activity more distributed? And the third kind of outcome metric is to increase the total number of miners, right? This is important, yes, but it is far from the only metric that matters, because you can imagine, a situation where one miner has 99% and 1,000 other miners, right, have 0.001% each. That is clearly not what we want, even though that increases the total number of miners. So contributing factors to perhaps why we're seeing this current situation, lack of non-custodial mining pools, a lack of user-friendly mining GUI, those come into it. But there's also factors with just the nature of POX itself, in that larger miners get economies of scale that smaller miners do not get. So a Bitcoin transaction fee is a fixed cost of your total mining activity, whereas the bid, right, the portion that actually gets you a winning % chance of a block is a variable cost. And so if we look at that breakdown, just to explain briefly what I mean by this. So ignore Bitcoin transaction fees for now, right? Assume that all the bids are 1 million sats per block. If you look at a big miner like miner A, if they're currently bidding, 50,000 sats and they want to increase their bid 5,000 sats to 55,000 sats, well, the desired win chance per sat is the same, right? It drops off when they increase because they increase the total, but that drops off in total for a smaller miner as well. So the difference in these numbers doesn't much matter as the difference between A and B rows. So when A increases their bid by 5,000 sats, it has a very tiny decrease to the win chance per sat, but that decrease is the same that happens to a small miner increasing their bid from 5,000 sats to 10,000 sats. So regardless of your size, the variable benefit you get per sat is the same, right? These two numbers in row A and B are the same. These two numbers in row A and B are the same. So the bid portion treats everyone equally, for lack of a better phrase. However, the fee portion is a fixed cost, right? And so if we assume the average transaction fee is 9,000 sats, someone who wants to get 50,000 sats towards a chance of winning a block is basically paying an 18% fee as a portion of their bid. Someone bidding only 5,000 sats is paying a 180% fee, right? The Bitcoin transaction fee is larger, almost twice as large as their entire bid. So that's obviously going to, make it impractical for anyone of that size to mine with that bid. And conversely, right, you see more realistic to what miners are currently doing, bidding like 500,000, right, 500 sats, where the fee is more like just a 1.8% fee. So I think another great point that Ryan has made is that mining is a closed system, right? When we talk about these fees, when we talk about rewards, it's important to keep in mind that mining profits can accrue to either stackers as stacking rewards, to miners as kind of arbitrage rewards or arbitrage profit, or waste like fees and burned Bitcoin in this case. And so there was a couple different approaches that have been discussed and that we're going to dig into now to kind of level the playing field, right? Remember that the goal is to improve the decentralization of stacks. And so there's been a couple different proposals. One is kind of this approach of equalizing the Bitcoin transaction fees. So like removing them completely or have them count towards your win percent chance, which standardizes them, makes them a same percentage price that everyone is paying. It's not different if you're smaller or larger now, or require a minimum fee as a percent of the bid. Another approach is to cap large miners' activity. This has some downsides, but just wanted to cover everything first. So, you know, that could be a hard cap on max bids per address, or like a diminishing benefit to a larger and larger bid per address. Obviously, non-custodial mining pools benefit because a pool would only have to send one Bitcoin transaction in theory, right? So depending on how the pool is set up. And so you could imagine pools that are only paying one Bitcoin transaction fee for a bunch of different miners. So effectively each of those miners is saving on the Bitcoin transaction fee portion of it versus doing it themselves. And then dust mining is a proposal that Munib has kind of mentioned, sending a bid of just, you know, Bitcoin transaction fee, dust gets a pre-specified percent of rewards. So those are some of the approaches. I think that's pretty comprehensive of what's been thrown out there. Some other considerations just to keep in mind, I think this is the last thing I wanted to cover before getting into it, is we don't want to necessarily incentivize large miners to, you know, split up their bids into many different addresses and pretend to be small miners, right? It doesn't explicitly help decentralization, and it kind of muddies the waters. We don't necessarily want to add a system with unexpected, uncontrolled outcomes, right? It's probably better to do something that has less of an impact, but more of a known and controllable impact than risk destabilizing, you know, POX itself entirely. And we need to balance kind of expected benefits with implementation difficulty, of course, and be biased for controlled experimentation and action over, you know, trying to get a perfect solution that will take years to implement. So that was how I wanted to frame the conversation, and happy to kind of open it up or get into it, Jude and Ryan. I'll go back to this slide where we have these different approaches. Ryan, did you want to speak to any of these specifically, or have any specific recommendations or suggestions? Is he still here? Oh, he's muted now. Jenny, can you unmute Ryan?
Yeah, he's muted.
Thank you. Yeah, just that was a great summary. I don't think I have anything to add until we get into specific details.
Okay, cool. Jude, same page?
Yep, same page.
Okay, so maybe we should get into the specifics then. I mean, for lack of anything better, I'll kick it off with kind of what I have, my synthesis of what the best path forward is. I think the best of these options, given all the considerations we just talked about, is I'm quite partial to Ryan, one of your more recent proposals of either counting the Bitcoin transaction fee toward someone's chance of winning, although that has, we kind of talked about that has like a destabilization risk at least, or the more controlled one of requiring a minimum fee as a percent of bid, right? So if I want to bid 100,000 sats, I have to pay, for example, 10% of that of the fee, so 10,000 sats as a Bitcoin transaction fee. What this does is now ensure that every miner, regardless of their size, is paying exactly 10% of their bid as a fee. So that variability in fixed costs between one miner and another based on their size goes away. Regardless of your size, you're paying the same percentage fixed costs for the fee portion. I like that proposal, and I think it can be pursued in line with the dust mining proposal as well. But that's kind of my synthesis of the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think you're referring to the 10%. Yeah, there's the 10% proposal where all miner transactions have to be 10% of the total value of the transaction has to be 10% in fees. And then I just posted a link to the most recent one that I posted, which is, you know, on towards the end of the call, I didn't post it, but I mentioned like, well, what if you just counted 100% of the fees towards the VRF weighting? And a couple people gave some feedback saying that it could have negative externality of, you know, a miner could say, fuck it, I'm just gonna do 100% in fees, and that would cause a negative externality. So I posted this version, and this, which I think is at this point, in my opinion, the best. And we can get into reasons why, but this one would instead only count 90% of the miner fee towards the VRF weighting, and it would count 100% of the transfer amount towards the VRF weighting. And you can read the post for like details of why, and we can get into the pros and cons. But I think actually, like after going into it, I think all of the other proposals have some kind of, you know, negative externality or net negative. And I would say, depending on what we're trying to do, we're trying to minimize the change to the system right now, and we're trying to minimize externalities, and we're trying to optimize for the goal of decentralization. I just want to withdraw two proposals, which is like the first one that I proposed, which was to move the VRF calculation to the stacks layer. And the second one I'd like to withdraw is the one where you count 100% of the miner fee towards a VRF weighting, because I think that has negative externalities.
Okay. But, and just to be clear, you are saying you like this latest proposal of 90% of the
90%, yes.
VRF, you like that better than
everything else.
Okay, interesting.
Because I think it has the best of both worlds. But yeah, we can get into, you know, I want to let everyone else comment, and I don't want to talk too much. Yeah.
But just really briefly, the reason you're not doing 100% is because an attacker could spam the network that way?
Not an attacker, just you know, I think the negative externality that could occur is someone could say, okay, well, I'm bidding 100,000 sats. I get the same VRF weighting, whether these sats go to stackers or whether they go as to Bitcoin transaction fees. And someone could just say, I'd rather they go to Bitcoin miners, and that they would take away from stacking rewards. Whereas if you only count 90% of the Bitcoin transaction towards a VRF weighting, then
you can't like sabotage stackers.
You can't sabotage, exactly. You can't sabotage stackers. You're automatically 10% less profitable.
But
so
you are incentivizing Bitcoin miners to get skin in the game now, because now they can take these transactions and then they can just pay themselves, I don't know, 10 Bitcoin or some obscenely high number in transaction fees. Even if the fees only count for 1% of your sortition weight, like miners have the deepest pockets.
Yes, and for that you can just have a cap on the weight on the Bitcoin transaction fee. You could say that the cap, like 90%. Sorry, I should have included this. You say up to 90% of the average fee of the last 144 blocks is counted.
Yeah, you would want to have some sort of clamp in place.
Yeah.
Probably over all of the Bitcoin transactions then.
Yes, yes.
Like a median would be better for the same reason,
median.
Jenny,
hey everyone, Munibir.
Wants to speak to this more too.
Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, awesome. Thanks everyone. Great summary and presentation. I think I like some of these proposals. Like I'm having like all sorts of potential things that can go wrong here. Like I think we should approach adding Bitcoin fees to the VRF with a lot of care, I think, because it introduces a whole set of new type of actors into the economics. Because now, as Jude mentioned, there are Bitcoin miners who basically effectively can mine for free. right? And Bitcoin mining is not that decentralized. Like it's a bunch of pools. It's a very small number of folks. Like I can just like walk you through a very realistic attack. Let's say there are two pools that come together, and they basically say we're going to start mining for free on Stack, right? All they're doing is they're even if it's 90%, let's say they get a 10% hit, but they can bid as high as they want because they're just sending money to themselves, right? Yeah. And they can their hit rate is very high, like more than half of the time they're actually mining. So they're effectively mining for free on Stacks, right? So I would be very careful about introducing the Bitcoin fee as part of the incentive. If you could just mine with Bitcoin fee, you should also keep in mind that there are potential malicious actors out there who might have a lot of Bitcoin and who can even spend some amount of Bitcoin just to mess up mining, right? So especially, let's say there's someone out there who's like, you know what, I will send a donation to Bitcoin miners just to like mess up Stacks, and they can do that in a system like this. So I think it requires like a lot of further analysis for what can happen here.
Yeah, we'd at the very least want to convince ourselves that we've capped whatever advantage Bitcoin miners could get in the system. One way you might do that is to combine this with something like your Bitcoin fee must be, your POX reward must be at least some multiple of the Bitcoin TX fee always. So that way, like, even if you have deep pockets as a miner, you have to pay that much more to POX, thereby giving you a capped upside. I guess that's kind of like the 10% idea that's here as well. We could hybridize the two approaches potentially, but yeah, like miners, if fees can help you in any way, Bitcoin fees, then you're basically giving Bitcoin miners an advantage here.
Yeah, does that same, I'm trying to think through it, does that same issue arise with the minimum fee as a percent of, your VRF portion? So if I want to get, 100,000 sats into VRF and we're implementing, okay, you have to pay 10% as a fee, then I would have to pay 10,000 sats. If I tried to bump up that fee, I would be implicitly sending more into the VRF, which is going to stackers.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're a Bitcoin miner, like you're still getting a discount here. If the fee counts in any way. It's just that we can make it so that you can't get an arbitrarily steep discount.
Yeah. And yeah, makes sense. I mean, that element of it though already applies. A Bitcoin miner would already get a discount on their Bitcoin transaction fee. It just wouldn't be, it's just not a super high percentage right now.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Looks like Ryan's trying to get unmuted here.
Hi. Yeah, that's a great point. I think these are all great points. I think if you make a couple of parameters, which is, the max VRF weighting that's taken into account is the median Bitcoin fee of the last 144 blocks. This concern does not apply. So I think that is true if the VRF weighting is unlimited, if the Bitcoin fee can go super high. But I point out, like, imagine like you have a 200,000 sats miner, and we say that the fee is 10,000 sats, right? So what you're getting there is you have the 200,000 sats fully going towards the VRF. You have 9,000 of the 10,000 going towards the VRF, so that's 209,000. So the efficiency there is, close to, what is that? That's basically 99.5%. Meanwhile, a Bitcoin miner that doesn't contribute a large amount towards stacking proof of transfer would, like, let's say they don't do any proof of transfer, their maximum efficiency is 90%. So the only way that they can have close, like, comparable efficiency is if they do become a large transfer. And when you get into it, you compare like multiple 200,000 sats miners, their efficiencies are within 99th percentile. So if anything, if you're concerned about Bitcoin miners, there's only like 0.1% difference in efficiency, even if the Bitcoin miners are getting the fee, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
we can do the calculation to show this.
This is in the case where we cap the VRF fees contribution by the last 144 blocks, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Can we unmute Munib, by the way, Jimmy?
I'm unmuted. Thanks. I think the capping would help, but now I'm thinking that now a Bitcoin miner, I'm assuming that a Bitcoin miner can send fees for free, right? So now a Bitcoin miner is pretending to be 1,000 miners and is mostly mining with fees with very little to no BTC actually going to stackers, right? Because they can still overwhelm the system by mostly mining for free.
They can also mess with the fee calculation too, because
they can already do that.
Transactions to themselves.
If you they can't, because the fees don't count in our VRF, right? So
it doesn't matter whether they count. They still have a 5% advantage over. So let's say the average miner right now is 400,000 sats. Five miners each at 400,000 sats. 10,000 is 1/40th. That's a 2.5% fee. Bitcoin miners currently have a 2.5% advantage over existing large caps. So if they become a large cap, they have a 2.5% advantage that already exists. This proposal would remove that 2.5% advantage and provide a small advantage. Does that make sense? So the advantage is actually less than the current system.
Sorry, I'm confused, right? So the situation I'm describing is that as soon as Bitcoin fees are included in the VRF in any shape or form, right? Like let's say that there's a penalty for bidding more through fees versus bidding more through actually sending to stackers. If bidding through fees is possible, a Bitcoin miner can pretend to be 1,000 miners and just bid through fees.
That's true, but now they're operating at a 10% disadvantage.
Right? Not 10%. Like that's free money for them, right?
It's not. I'll tell you why it's not free, because there's an opportunity cost to not including someone else's transaction. Assuming there's a fee market, assuming there's a fee market, right? Which means the total number of transactions exceeds the block size. That means that miners are de facto losing out on that as a fee to themselves. So actually, to miners, it's not free. It is an opportunity cost of including someone else's transaction that they leave in the pool. So you're absolutely right if there's no fee market active. However, if there is an active fee market, the miner misses out on opportunity cost, which is equivalent to the amount that a non-miner would spend. Does that make sense?
If the block reward, though, that they're getting out of the stacks block can offset, it's still worth more than the lost opportunity.
It's still worth more, but they're still paying 10,000 sats worth of opportunity cost.
Yes. Regardless. So now let's say there were miners who were mining normally, meaning that the bulk of their bid is coming on the stacking side and not on the fee side. They're only getting hit by the fee. The stacking money is not going to them, right? So that is like basically very tiny hit. Like do you see what I mean? Like they're only losing out on the fee portion.
10,000 sats of a transaction they left in the mempool, and they're gaining 10,000 sats. Does that make sense? So for every, so they net zero. They don't actually have any benefit.
Your analysis would make sense if the BTC fee portion is equivalent to the 1,000 STX rewards. That's not the case.
No, it doesn't matter. What it matters is the marginal transaction in the mempool bribing is the marginal transaction in the mempool, the one with the highest available fee, is that transaction equivalent to a STX miner transaction fee? If they're both 10,000 sats, then the miner is
but sometimes the blocks are not even full, right? But sometimes blocks are not even full. That's
right. So that's what I said. When blocks are not full, that's what I said. Yeah. When blocks are not full, you are correct. Miners can mine at a discount. However, when blocks
that discount is 100%. That's a very dangerous place to be. That discount is it's 100%. It's 100% discount.
Hold on, it's not 100%. If a typical miner
mines at 200,000 sats, right? And there's 10,000 sats of fees, right? Then that's a very small percentage of the total reward. I agree with you. If the blocks are like almost completely empty and there's a ghost town in Bitcoin, then miners are incentivized to try to fill up the blocks with these kinds of transactions. However, almost always there is a fee market. Does that make sense? So you generally don't have this as an issue.
All right.
Even when it happens, it's not. I don't think it's a problem.
All right, Ryan, could you tell me when you're done, and then I would like to talk
Sure.
about it.
I'll finish. Go ahead.
All right. So here's a scenario that I want to describe, and I would like people to think more about it. Bitcoin blocks are generally not full. They're typically empty, right? The scenario that I'm describing is that a Bitcoin miner wants to bid only as fees. They don't want to send any money to stackers, right? So whatever block space is left, they have that block space available to them to fill it up with basically free bids, whatever space is left. So the attack vector here is that whatever free space is available in any Bitcoin block, a Bitcoin miner would basically send fees to themselves and count that towards mining STX. So they're basically pushing everybody else out at 100% discount.
Manib, I think that's why it's going to be very important that if we adopt any situation like any mechanism like this, the fee weight you have should either be clamped somehow by factors beyond the miner's control, such as the median of the last 144 blocks, which the miner could potentially influence, but not by very much, and certainly not for free. Or the other idea could be that your POX portion must be at least some integer multiple of your fee portion. So if you're paying all fees but no POX, your transaction is just ignored by Stacks network.
Yes, exactly. I think that portion where you're stacking the POX portion or stacking portion or whatever you want to call it, it has to be a certain multiple of the fees. If that's not there, this attack is valid, right? But if we put that thing in there, then it's a question of like, then whatever number we pick is effectively the hit on the Bitcoin yield that we're willing to take, right? So if we say that your total POX side has to be like 10x the fees or whatever that number is, then we're explicitly saying that we will take the hit on the Bitcoin yield side.
Yep, because that Bitcoin no longer goes to stackers; it is a fee that goes to Bitcoin miners. From my perspective, that seems like the best of the options so far presented.
Yeah, we could do both. So if you're looking at the chat right now, Ryan proposes is doing both. Take the median fee or some nonlinear function that is like the median or involves the median calculation of the last 144 blocks, and then say like, hey, this portion of the fee that you're paying will count towards your POX payout, but your POX payout must be like 10x this in order for it to even be considered.
But I think that it still penalizes the small money, right? Because they won't be able to bid.
But it's the 10. But point number 2, though, the multiple of that fee must be the POX payout. Is I think what stops Bitcoin miners from using this.
And it also it standardizes the percent fee people are paying. So yeah, like tiny miners still will probably be priced out, but medium-sized, like medium to smallish large will be on a level playing field as the truly gigantic whales.
Yeah, in this system, like there's you're still the smallest miner the system can support is still one that can afford to pay a Bitcoin fee every Bitcoin block. Yeah. And that's not cheap. Like that's not something that a typical person could do, for example, but it's certainly a lot cheaper than what the miners today are trying to do. And we're not limited to just taking these options here. Like one of the other level the playing field options here is non-custodial mining pools. Like a mining pool could easily be a medium cap miner. So a bunch of people can get together through a wallet and mine together, and then that their combined Bitcoin could easily afford to pay the transaction fee every Bitcoin block, and then some to the POX payouts, and have a shot of winning Stacks blocks.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time here. I want to make sure that we have some time to answer any questions from the audience. Maddie, do you have any recommendations for how we can continue with this discussion? I assume we can take some of this offline. We'll try to summarize some points as well and give everyone involved some time to think more about what was discussed here. But anything you want to cap off the conversation with?
Yeah, I mean, so let's definitely get some questions here. There's to further engage on this, I can think of 3 avenues. One is the SIP proposal board itself. I don't know if I think multiple links have already been shared in the chat to those various proposals, and we'd love for more people to get involved, obviously, on those forums. 2 is there's a monthly call that Zan runs specific to mining. So if you're like extremely passionate about this specific topic, you can look into joining that call. And then the 3rd is just, obviously Twitter, reaching out to Jude, to Ryan, to Minnie. I mean, I don't want to, say reach out to them on their behalf, but certainly for me, like, we can continue this conversation on Twitter for anyone who wants to. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Thanks, Maddie. All right, looks like we have some questions if you want to go through them or prioritize which questions make sense.
Yeah. I feel like, well, okay, so we can start off with, if the Bitcoin chain has high traffic, so a very high sat per byte fee, wouldn't the median push out small stacks miners during that time? I think that gets to, Jude, your point about a clamping type of function.
Well, more generally, no matter what we do there, no matter what we do here, like if Bitcoin transaction fees go to, I'm just throwing a number out here, $1,000, then yes, as a miner, you're paying $1,000 every 10 minutes, and there's nothing we can really do about that. The only way to solve that is to decouple the act of mining from the act of sending a transaction every 10 minutes, and that's something that non-custodial pools would achieve. But that's potentially a separate call, a separate topic as to how exactly that would work, while also giving participants equivalent voting power that they would otherwise get had they been just a miner on the Bitcoin chain.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, we have a couple questions here specifically about non-custodial mining pools. This is also something you've given a great deal of thought to, Jude, I believe. If you want to just share kind of thoughts, progress, different approaches on that.
Sure. I'll preface it with saying that like non-custodial mining pools can be done in parallel to any of these efforts. They're not blocked or dependent on changing the way in which the VRF function works. And Stacks 2.1 is coming with the necessary feature changes that make it possible to build these. I believe that Daemon Technologies is taking the lead on making the first implementation, and I believe they're hiring if you're anxious or interested in helping out making that work. But the idea behind non-custodial mining pools is that there doesn't need to be an operator for pools in POX. What can happen instead is a set of individuals can produce a taproot address, and they can off-chain, they can sign that taproot address, and they can produce a block commit transaction, which commits to a Bitcoin block, which they send. And one of the changes coming in 2.1 is they can make that that Stacks block pay the block reward to a smart contract as opposed to a specific address. And then that smart contract can then mete out in a pro rata basis the block reward to the people who put the Bitcoin in. Off chain, what can happen as well is the mining participants can additionally vote on the block itself, like what transactions go in, what should the block hash be, such like that. So that way, if you're contributing X% of the Bitcoin, there is a way to make sure that you're also contributing X% of the voting power within the pool for what the pool is that gets produced. The pools are meant to be a solution for small cap miners. So that way you're no longer sending a Bitcoin transaction every 10 minutes. You and all of your buddies are sending a Bitcoin transaction every 10 minutes, and by doing so, amortizing that Bitcoin transaction fee across every pool participant. So instead of paying, let's say, $1,000 every 10 minutes, maybe paying $1 if there's 1,000 other people.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think there's actually a couple kind of hidden challenges with non-custodial mining pools. I don't necessarily think if we want to go down the rabbit hole right now, but like one
We
of them.
probably don't have time for that, but I'm supposed to say they are solvable.
Yeah, fair. Cool. All right. So Greg asks, is mining even supposed to be profitable? If the expected prize is a fixed quantity of stacks, the Coinbase, won't miners increase total Bitcoin bids until they reach the stacks Bitcoin exchange rate and everyone has no profit?
That's correct.
Yeah, great observation, Greg. I mean, that's essentially what we're seeing now, right? Like the miners are driving this arbitrage profit margin to 0% or slightly below 0%. So it's not that mining's supposed to be profitable, it's that it's supposed to be at least not wildly unprofitable, right? Because it's a difference between someone having to pay a huge fee just to be an altruistic miner and someone only having to pay like break even, but they'll mine altruistically to support the Stacks network.
Yeah, I would say, I think that's right. I'll build off of that. I think you want mining to be as close to zero profitability as possible.
Yeah.
If it's too high, then obviously more miners will come in and close the gap down to zero. If it's too low, if it's too negative, then people will drop out until it gets to zero. And I think that's perfectly good and fine and healthy for a few reasons. One, you alluded to, Maddie, that there's some element of altruistic mining, which is what we're seeing the foundation do. There's two other elements, which is that some people are willing to pay a premium for fresh coins.
Yep.
Let's say that's 2%, 2-3%. They're willing to pay more. They're willing to pay 2 or 3% more for a fresh coin than a coin off an exchange. And then the third aspect is that people might be willing to pay for dollar cost averaging. So you might be willing to pay 1% premium for the idea of being able to set it and forget a server that can execute buys of stacks on behalf of you. So I think 0% is good. And from a perspective of an altruistic miner, a dollar cost averaging miner, or a miner that wants fresh coins, each of those, they would operate at 0% profit, but they would have a net utility greater than 0%, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We also have this lovely smart contract platform that's tied to mining. Like you could easily do something like bind the, like a miner could earn an NFT, for example, on mining a block, and that NFT could be worth something. Same for fungible tokens. Like the Clarity language is aware of the address of the miner. So you can make smart contracts that reward miners additionally, like, hey, thanks for mining blocks. Like here, let me give you like early access to our new upcoming collection or something like that.
Yeah, I think one other thing to keep in mind, Greg, to your question, is this whole like closed system thing, right? Like, so if mining is implicitly very profitable right now, that's essentially missed rewards that could be going to stackers, right? Because every additional bid that drives mining less profitable is going directly to stackers. What achievement is unlocked? Sorry. Oh, the NFT. Yeah. Nice.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
No worries. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but please ping me or add it again if I missed it. I don't see anyone raising their hand either. So I think that's everything.
I think there's a couple more other questions. Did we answer these? Raphael's question, and did we answer the question?
I think we did. Yeah, we talked about that. Yep. And a crossfires.
Crossfire, yeah. That one.
And moods. I mean, we touched on that same concept.
Great. Well, if we've answered everyone's questions, Maddie, any other points you want to emphasize before we move on?
No, just a late question here. Yes, the recording, this is being recorded. Where will people find the recording, Jenny?
Probably on YouTube. We'll share it on Twitter as well, so everyone will know as soon as we get it cleaned up.
Cool. All right, so go to
Thank you
YouTube.
everyone for that discussion. I did want to take the final minutes. Sorry, Maddie, did I interrupt you? Is there anything you
I
wanted
was
to
just
say?
going to do a recap of of resources for people. So
Oh,
Twitter,
yes,
you
please.
to find the recording. There's the SIP forums for discussing general, not just mining specific, improvements and suggestions, but any suggestions. There's the monthly mining call that Zan runs for mining specific conversations, and then of course Twitter for everybody who spoke today. That's all I wanted to repeat.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like we have one more question from Christian.
Currently, if someone is building on stacks, can someone speak to the risks that exist with regards to the low amount of miners? If someone wants to issue an ICO on stacks, what risks because of the small miner size? Obviously, the general risk is the decentralization, risk. It's a smaller number of individuals are required to exceed 50%, 51%. But Jude, do you want to speak to perhaps more detail, more color, exactly how that risk might manifest itself?
If there are fewer miners and let's say like the ICO volume is so huge, it causes them all to crash, for example, because they're all running the same types of computers to run them, that's a risk.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. So I have a question. So isn't it the case that, we've talked about, the total number of miners isn't important. What's important is the number of miners that collectively make up 51%. You want that to increase. Well, in the case that, let's say we're somehow in a situation where 3 or 4 miners make up 51%, but there's a large long tail of miners, doesn't that long tail, even though it doesn't provide the top level decentralization protection, doesn't it also provide utility in the vein of what you just mentioned, which is if the top 3 or 4 go down, servers go down, then the long tail can pick it up?
Yes, but that's true even if there are no it's true for us right now though, like just because there's only 5 or 6 miners doesn't mean that there aren't hundreds of people who are willing to step up if the price is right.
But you need to be running a node. So what I'm saying is, by keeping the long tail actively running nodes that are waiting, that provides the ability for them to step in. Whereas right now, I think the fact that there's 5 or 6 means it'd be very difficult for them to step in. So I guess what I'm saying is maintaining the long tail is actually valuable.
Sure, that's valuable for a host of reasons though, like so making sure you have seamless failover to the next biggest miner is one reason. Another reason is that it grows the user base that's experienced with the mining software, and that in turn begets a higher quality software product and a higher quality documentation that goes along with it. Like, more users of software makes the software better. Like, no one's opposed to growing the total number of miners. I'm just pointing out that, like, for the purposes of decentralization, though, the long tail of miners isn't actually helping.
For decentralization, right? But there is some resiliency benefit in that.
Resiliency,
yeah. At least definitely a benefit for there being a long tail.
Right. Yeah. But Jude, your point was that there may already be, in effect, a hidden long tail waiting in the wings for, okay, everybody crashed, so now mining is profitable, so I'll step up to the plate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would be more disruptive.
I think it's possible.
No time, but
I would bet money it's not true.
Yeah, it's possible, but not known, and obviously
because it costs a lot of money to run a node.
It does.
Yeah, all else equal, would be better to have an active long tail than kind of a waiting hidden long tail. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And not only that, for there to be an existing long tail waiting, you would have needed people to have written specific software that waits for the right price, which, as far as I'm aware, no one has written that software and no one is running that software.
To the best of my knowledge, that's the case, yes.
Yeah, I'd be surprised. We have a question here about general benefits of building on stacks versus other Bitcoin protocols. I mean, I don't know if we have time or this is the right forum for the scope of that question, but maybe there's lots of some general resources we can point them towards: the Discord, the Twitter, at Stacks, any resources you like to point people towards, Jude, when they generally ask about why stacks?
I think Jason's got us covered right here.
Cool. All right. Yep, you got it. And then maybe one more question from Raphael. If the long tail is comprised of only small miners and bigger miners go down, Bitcoin fees are very high at the time, that could be a risk, right? Unless small miners are part of a pool. I mean, yeah, I guess the risk is that small miners don't react quickly enough.
Or they get knocked offline already because the fees are too high.
Yeah. It essentially doesn't ever become profitable enough for them to join because they're too small relative to the Bitcoin transaction fee.
Yeah, like for any miner whose spend is going to be whose budget is less than that of the Bitcoin transaction fee cannot mine right now. They are de facto waiting in the wings, or they're doing nothing. Yeah. Pools at least give them some way to turn that Bitcoin into stacks by actively participating as miners. And in the event that we have a catastrophic failure where all the solo miners go offline or all the top 5 miners go offline, then the pool or the pools that are left would be the ones running, and they would take over the chain at the way that the long tail in a chain like Ethereum would take over the chain.
Yeah, so there's definitely some benefits to not necessarily explicitly decentralization, but also resiliency in having these pools available, longer tail, smaller miners, even if they're not contributing directly to changing that number of miners it takes to hit 51%. So that's a good observation.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Great. Thank you guys for that great discussion. Excited to get this out, the recording out to everybody next week so we can all review. I'm sure we all want to review. I just wanted to take the final minutes to talk about other recent SIP activities. I just wanted to flag it. So I believe SIPs 13 and 18 have been moved to accepted status. And we will hopefully have the authors of those SIPs on next week's call to talk a little more about those proposals. So next week's call will take place at the same time as today's call, except on Thursday. And I think moving forward, we're going to do these weekly calls on Thursdays unless anyone has any major objections. We'll also be giving an overview of the SIPs process and introducing the consideration advisory boards, or CABs, who review things like the economic, governance, and ethical impacts of SIPs. So that is a great way to get extremely involved in the SIPs process if you're interested. And we will be talking more about that and how you can sign up next week. So just look out for the next event invitation. We'll share it on Twitter as usual. And you can probably add the recurring event to your calendar once we put that event out.
Awesome.
Any questions? Also, any suggestions for how we can improve these calls are always welcome. Again, the purpose of this call, in addition to having really impactful and insightful conversation, is to make it an open and friendly space for people to discuss SIP ideas. So if you feel like you have a SIP idea and you don't know whether you have the technical qualifications to see it through, don't worry. This is a great space to talk about that. You can find mentorship here. You can find buddies, potential coworkers on your SIP ideas. So yeah, always feel free to tune in. You can listen in. You don't have to participate in discussion until you're ready. Right, any other, well, I realize everyone's muted. Any other questions or suggestions? Just give me a thumbs up if you thought this was a great call. Thank you. Great for my ego. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for all the comments in the chat. I will see you at the next one.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.